Chapter 2. Detective Sergeant Ian Bradshaw stared at the woman's face and wondered what she'd looked like. Was she pretty once? He couldn't tell from this photograph. No one could. Someone had done one hell of a job on her. All of the woman's teeth had been pulled out with pliers, and the flesh on her face burnt with a strong acid, sulfuric most likely, of an amount sufficient to scorch away the lips, nose, eyelids, and the flesh from her cheeks, leaving discoloured skin that looked like it was part of a melted waxworks dummy. In a final brutal act, the tops of her fingers had been snipped off with pliers to prevent a collection of prints. Thankfully, these horrific injuries had all been inflicted post-mortem. According to the report, the cause of death had been strangulation with a ligature of some kind. The victim would have had no knowledge of the gruesome things done to her to erase her identity. This might be some small comfort to her family, but, since they would probably never be able to positively ID the body, tracing them seemed an unlikely prospect. In the absence of teeth, they'd had to resort to scientific analysis of the bones in order to put an approximate age to the corpse, which was estimated at somewhere between 15 and 19 years of age, according to the experts. This was all to do with the amount of cartilage present in the joints of the limbs, which transforms into bone as a body develops. The corpse was not yet fully matured, so they were attempting to identify a relatively young woman. The body had been found 3 months ago following a tip-off about illegal goings-on at a scrapyard with suspected links to some of the region's shadier businessmen. The officers who attended had hoped to find drugs or money, but figured they would more likely have to settle for stolen goods or perhaps the discovery of a hot car awaiting the crushing machine. They didn't expect to find a body. They certainly weren't ready for one missing its face. Predictably, the guy running the scrapyard swore he knew nothing about the body found at the back of his premises. The place was a vast out-of-town site with cars piled up all round it, so a heap of dead bodies could have been hidden in one of its messier corners without anyone spotting them. It didn't stop them giving the guy a thorough going-over. He had no idea why anyone would dump a body at his scrapyard. He had not been asked to dispose of it, he had no clue as to its identity, nor did he ever hang out with known criminals. Nobody believed him, of course. Nathan Connor was a shifty and feckless loser with a minor league criminal past, presumably granted custody of the yard for those very reasons. He would do as he was told without asking questions, but was he actually a killer? It seemed unlikely, and, aside from the fact that he oversaw the yard where the body was dumped, there was nothing to link him to the murder. Efforts to trace his employer proved frustrating. They were able to interview one other man who was described as the owner, but under questioning from the police, he couldn't remember too much about the place. It wasn't long before he was dismissed as a frontman, whose name was on the door and ownership papers, with no actual involvement in the day-to-day running of the enterprise, which was ideal for laundering cash and ridding its real owners of awkward items like a body. The detectives gave up trying to get anything more out of either man, and they were released on police bail. The threat of a lengthy prison sentence was not as frightening a prospect as grassing up whoever really owned the scrapyard. Usually, senior detectives in Durham Constabulary vied with one another for murder cases. They were rare in these parts, and a successful conviction would be a feather in the cap that could ultimately lead to promotion. However, an unidentifiable victim meant the usual enthusiasm for a murder case was absent. The detective superintendent placed responsibility for the case with D.I. Kate Tennant, a newly promoted outside transfer who was the only female detective on the force with a rank higher than detective constable. She was also bright enough to realise she'd been stitched up like a kipper. Nothing in those intervening months had altered Tennant's view, even if she steadfastly maintained an outward conviction that her team, which included D.S. Bradshaw, would ultimately solve a case that saw them plodding through a seemingly endless number of box-ticking inquiries for more than 3 months, with nothing in the way of concrete leads. How could they hope to solve this murder, Bradshaw wondered for the umpteenth time, if there were no witnesses, nothing from the usual public appeals, zero intelligence from sources in the criminal world, and they could not even identify the victim? "What are you doing?" He hadn't noticed D.C. Malone's approach until she was standing over his shoulder. He could tell she was perturbed to find him staring at images of the burned girl, as she had become known to them. Looking at her photos. He deliberately included the word her. "Why are you looking at them?" Bradshaw knew D.C. Malone thought he was just being ghoulish. "To remind myself."